I was born in Ferndale, Michigan, born and raised in Southfield, Michigan, but Ferndale is the nearest small town. And the only thing I ever heard about being born was my mother said that was the only time she ever saw me in a hurry. So,
meaning you were a quick birth?
I guess it was a quick birth. Once it started, it was a quick birth, yeah.
And the circumstances you were born into? Brothers and sisters?
My parents are both teachers. At that time, I had 3 older brothers. And then myself. Eventually, there were a younger sister, then 2 more younger brothers.
So you're right in the middle then?
I'm right in the middle, yeah.
Oh. Good or bad?
I think it's good.
Yeah.
It's good, yeah. Bit of a loner, but right in the middle.
Talk to me about your parents, or parental style, if you will.
Parents were both teachers. Disciplinarians in terms of very, very effective in the classroom. I think both parents used to say, you know, all I have to do is walk in the classroom. If they're cutting up, they just calm down. I think they were both extremely good teachers. My dad was a physics teacher, taught both high school and college. My mother was a 5th grade teacher, and so she went back to teaching after the youngest in the family, Dave, started into grade school. So,
did you get it both at school and at home, being that that's what their profession was?
No, we really didn't. I can remember one time in particular where I had some sort of arithmetic assignment, long division, and I'm not sure the nuns knew that much about math, teaching, and whatnot. And so my dad was trying to help me with it, and I thought, you know, what does he know about teaching math? But he was really a good teacher. So no, we didn't get that stuff at home.
What would you say were they strict? Were they?
I would say they were affectionately strict. You never had the feeling, you know, that you had to be afraid of them or anything like that. You knew if you'd done something wrong, you were going to get spanked or something. And at that time, that was pretty normal form of discipline. But with 6 kids in the family, you know, you've got to toe the mark. And
where did you say you grew up again at?
Southfield, Michigan, which is just outside Detroit.
Well, what was it like? This was just a little bit after the war there, and what was it like growing up, having all those kids around the house?
Well, we not only had the 6 kids in our house, cousins, my mother's sister, lived right across the road. They had 9 kids in their family, and then on the other corner, the Gardners, they had 11 kids in their family. And now, of course, between our family and the cousins' Caverleys right across the road, if you just happened to pop in, you'd have a hard time telling which family was which. But it was a great way to get raised. We're way out in the country, and my dad owned 5 acres. During the summer when he wasn't teaching, he raised gladiolas commercially. And so we were out there working on the gladiolas, and of course with all that space we had a lot of vegetable gardens and whatnot. So both my parents had come from central Michigan farming families, so they were right at home with 5 acres. And
did you find yourself having gardens and having a knowledge of planting and that when you were young? Oh
yeah, because he had so many flowers, he used to pay us a dime a row, and the rows were probably 75, 85 feet long, to weed them. So you got down on hands and knees and and weeded to make sure those gladiolas, got a good start. So yeah, a lot of dirt therapy at that time. And I remember when I was probably 10 or 11, for some reason my mother said, Donald, if you wanted to have a garden strip here, you can have it. So I put in a garden, and it was, a good-sized garden, and ran the vegetables myself. Yeah, it was a very good experience.
Other early experiences that you might remember with brothers and sisters. How old was the oldest? How many years older than you was?
The oldest would have been 6 years older than I was. But when I was 5 years old, he died in an accident right there at home. Again,
what was his name?
His oldest brother's name was Joe. So the oldest brother was Joe, and then Jack, and then Chuck. Then it was my turn, then my sister Julianne, and then Bob, and then David. And
almost a run on J's. They just quit the J thing.
I hadn't even noticed that before. But yeah, when Dad bought the place, it was a barn on the property that we were born and raised in. A barn.
Wait, born?
Well, I was born in Ferndale, but everybody was right there at home. And he had a root cellar built into the side of a hill, so that on the top of the hill you could walk onto the root cellar and then dropped off and then down below. And he kept the glads in there. And my brother fell off that root cellar and took a cinder block with him. And so that was probably my very earliest memory of anything of consequence. We never talked about that. Back then they had no therapy for that, and I think Mother took it pretty hard. I think Mother had pretty much went into depression as a result of that. I think the following summer, Dad farmed all us kids off to relatives, but came back, and Mom seemed to be in pretty good shape from then on.
How would you describe your relationship with your brothers and sisters back then when you were still at home?
Back then, it would have been very competitive. We were a very competitive family. The house was situated such we had a big side yard, big enough for a baseball diamond in the summer and a beautiful football field in the wintertime. And then with all those kids we always had a team ready to go. So as a result, we were very competitive.
A team for what? What did you play?
Oh, we played baseball in the summertime. We played football in the fall and winter.
The girls too?
The girls too. Well, the girls played until they started into high school. And then the oldest cousin simply announced that, you can't play anymore. And they were good athletes. It was a real blow to not have them play anymore with us. But so we're very competitive. I would say we had the usual sibling rivalry, but now we get together all the time. I go back to Detroit as often as I can. We go on vacations together, and it's just a fun time. I'm surprised when I hear other people talk about getting back with their family, how much arguing there is or how much bickering, but we don't have any of that in our family. So it's a great feeling to go back home.
What was school like?
School. Went to a parochial school, St. Michael's School, had nuns all through the 8 grades. Once I learned how to read, I just loved to read. I read all the time. So I liked school a lot. I liked the socializing of school. I thought socializing was just as important as the academic side. So I liked school a lot. Was a fairly good student during grade school. Was a fairly good student.
So I get the hint that something changed in high school.
Well, I'm not sure where I got this idea that when you're studying, if you read something more than once, it's almost like cheating. So you just read it one time, and then you take the test and see how you do. And it wasn't that I didn't like to study. I loved to study. I would, read, if there was a course and there were a couple other textbooks I could come up with, I would, read a couple other textbooks besides the one that was assigned. So I loved learning, just that I had this screwball idea about tests. So I was pretty much a C student. But by the time I graduated from college, I got the idea, and from then on I got A's and B's.
Huh. So other activities that you had through the school years, were you involved in sports or clubs or?
Where we were, the grade school I went to, the parochial school, didn't have a gym, so I never played basketball. They did have a big playground, so we played baseball all the time. So when I got to high school, I had no idea what basketball was all about, and I think I played 1 year And as I recall, they kept pretty good stats, and I scored more fouls than points. So I thought, there's something wrong here. What I did do, play in high school, was handball. And even though I was pretty small, I was really pretty good at handball. And that was probably my long, strong suit. But we also had a good program in high school for sports. So always played sports, yeah. In sports, what I thought was really pretty good at was, number one was handball, and number two was baseball. And actually it wasn't baseball, it was softball that we played. But I was a big believer in practice, 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 and I started off practicing fielding. And if I could just find anybody to hit it to me, I would be out there for hours on a day. Then you had to switch positions, and then I started learning how to bat. And what I tried to do was give somebody good outfield practice by hitting it as high as I could. And of course, that translated into being able to hit the ball pretty well. So I was a pretty good hitter, place hitter as well as some distance. So I thought I did pretty well.
What's going through your mind in the high school years about your future? What do you think is going to happen after high school, were you thinking?
When I left grade school, I decided I was going to be a Catholic priest. So I went into the seminary for 4 years, which was a great classical education. So we had 4 years of Latin. Where did you go to?
Went to Sacred Heart Seminary. It was a diocesan seminary in Detroit. And I'd actually gotten interested in it because our parish back in Southfield originally started off as a Franciscan monastery. And so I went and saw what that monastic life was like, and the liturgy and the chant and whatnot. I was pretty intrigued from a very young age. Going into a diocesan seminary was a little different, but still pretty much the same thing. So I thought it was a great, great education.
What do you think was what was it about going into priesthood or seminary, or what was it that really, as you think back on it now, why would you have thought to do that? What was going through your mind?
Back then, in the 40s, that would have been quite the thing for a family to do, to have somebody go into the priesthood. But it was just a personal like on my part. I just kind of fell in love with the idea of that sort of life. I found that people tended to confide in me. I tended to be a pretty good listener, and I think that's an important part of that priesthood.
And where did it change? How come you're not a priest?
When I was in my junior year, we had some sort of ceremony late at night, and one of the priests got up and gave an extensive talk. He was the chemistry professor there. Gave a talk on transubstantiation, the changing of the body and blood, or the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. And after I heard that, I thought, this can't be. And I checked it out, went to a religion class, and the same story all over again. And I thought, I just can't imagine that somebody can say just a few words and change the substance of bread and wine into infinite God. And so as a result, I decided to leave after my senior year.
Now, this was the equivalent of college.
That would have been high school.
Oh,
that would have been high school.
Senior year seminary.
Senior year
so
of high school.
It was a high school seminary program.
It was a high school seminary. So right out of grade school, you go into this program. I guess one of the other great things was the relationships you formed there. And I don't think I've ever seen anything like it after, because what you've got is all these guys have the very same life goal in mind. And everybody is shooting for the same goal. And at that age, that's a pretty powerful thing. And I'm still pretty close to those guys, those who went on through and finished, and those who finished and got out of the priesthood. And there are quite a few of those from our class. Mm-hmm. And our class was probably the largest ordination class there was. And at that point, that's when things started turning over, and now it's just a skeleton of what it used to be.
So you changed your mind to go into what then?
I had no idea. That was, my whole life had been geared toward that one thing. And so I think that I spent pretty much my college years figuring out where I'm going to go from there. Pretty soon, I decided to major in philosophy. And a couple of reasons for that. One of the options I had was going to law school after college.
and the dean of the law school was recommending a philosophy major. The other thing was, in high school, I had Algebra 1, and I liked it a lot, and I did pretty well at it. But then because of a faculty problem, they never offered our class another math course. So I never had any more math in high school except for Algebra 1. So when I get to college, I combed through that catalog to find out, okay, what courses do I have to take where I don't have to take any math whatsoever, which was probably one of the stupidest decisions I ever made. But anyway, so as a result, I had just all kinds of options with that philosophy major, the way that the school was structured. So I just took a whole lot of elective courses through college. Loved it.
And you loved it. And
Yeah.
what is it about philosophy that you like?
I guess that it just makes you stop and contemplate about the bigger questions, and more of an appreciation for life after you get out. I didn't know that at the time, of course, but and of course the philosophy, if I'd stayed in the seminary, that's exactly what I would have majored in also, was because after your 4 years of high school, you have 2 years of college, then 2 years of philosophy, and then 4 years of theology after that before you get ordained. So I guess it was kind of along the same lines. It wasn't that big a shift psychologically.
Did you have something in mind to do with it professionally after?
Aside from the law school, no. And I did 1 year of law school and didn't do very well in that at all, even though I loved the law.
Where did you go to college at?
University of Detroit, which is a Jesuit institution. Back then, there was no question where you were going to go to college. If you were going to go to college, you were going to go to college right here because that's the way it was. And so I stayed right in town. So I was away from home during high school, but I stayed at home during college. And I really liked staying home. That was.
And you went to law school where?
I went to law school at the Detroit College of Law, and I lasted just 1 year there. I think one of the problems was it's a case study is what it is, and you read the case and then there's an issue to decide. And I always felt, if I can decide what the issue is going to be, I can tell you who's going to win the case. But it seems like there's only one issue to be decided, and I never quite got the hang of that. So I just wasn't making good marks at all, and at the end of the year I quit.
To do what?
I had taken a speed reading course from Evelyn Wood and did well enough at that she asked me if I wanted to teach it. And so she hired me to teach in Washington, D.C.
The actual Evelyn Wood?
The actual Evelyn Wood drove me from the University of Delaware into Washington, D.C. And so I had a chance to talk to her how she got into it, and that was all pretty interesting as well. So I taught speed reading in Washington, D.C. for a year. Having graduated with a degree in philosophy and not having any idea what you're going to do, and this speed reading I thought was just the greatest thing ever. I mean, I was an avid reader, and this let you do
Wasn't that
it.
in the day when they actually had the machine that would move?
No, we never used a machine.
Never used the machine.
We used the hand to
Oh, okay.
pace yourself.
Okay.
And
My parents bought the machine along with the encyclopedia set. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah. I think maybe we got the machine for free. I don't know.
Okay.
And how did that go?
That was very good for a year, because at that time that was probably one of the most pop things going. There was all kinds of free advertising. We had people coming in and signing up, and classes ran all day and classes ran all night. And after a while, after near the end of the first year, they said, well, we'd like to open up an institute in Baltimore. We'd like to have you go up and that's just 25 miles up the road from Washington, D.C. I'd like to have you go up and open the institute there and open that area. And I said, well, I've been teaching these classes, and I see that you're not screening anybody coming in. So we're getting some people who are, who just don't know how to read at all. And you're taking them in, you're taking their money, and there's no way we can help them. As a matter of fact, it just gets more frustrating. And so I think that, we ought to be doing a screening process before. And they said, well, maybe you don't really want to teach speed reading. So that was the end of that right there.
You weren't doing as many sales or something as?
Oh, no, it's just that
It wasn't.
with that attitude, they just, they were hauling money to the bank in wheelbarrows. And there was no sense in doing this screening and eliminating somebody who might might pay the money. And they're paying pretty good bucks for it then.
Yeah. So you moved on to?
So there I was in Washington, D.C., and I'd always had a strong interest in national and international affairs. And I had, my first choice would have been State Department, but I'd taken the Foreign Service exam when I was in college and didn't score high enough on it to be invited. And so I went to the CIA. I worked at the Central Intelligence Agency for 10 years. And that was another great, I thought, great career choice, but it too came to an end.
Doing what, if you can say?
Well, the agency has two ends of the house. You got the research end, and then you got the operational end where you actually do the spying. And I really wanted to get into the research end because I'd gotten involved in economics right after college. And so I really wanted to do economic research, but they put me into the operational end, and that's what I did for most of the time I was there.
In the States or out of the States?
I spent a tour in Vietnam. So I studied Vietnamese for 6 months before I went over there. Once I got over there, they said, you know, just look around, find some place where you can practice your Vietnamese. So I found a situation, a training situation where I lived in the huts with the natives and wore the black pajamas and learned how to speak it pretty well. I eventually became a translator-interpreter at the National Interrogation Center. Was just one of the things I did while I was there.
And that was during Vietnam?
That was during the Vietnam War. So I got there 67, 68, and 69, which was really the peak of it all.
But you were involved in a lot of the conflict, or? No,
as working for the agency, you're really working out of the embassy, and you're really working with civilians all the time. You know, I think that when an American goes abroad to work with the agency, they don't do the spying themselves. Really what they have to do is they have to find somebody who's in place to gather the information you want. So it's kind of a series of steps, you know, where you have to do some spotting, which means you have to find somebody in the right place, and then you have to do assessing, which is do a kind of an in-depth psychological assessment as to what are their motivations if they're going to go to work for you. There's a moment where you've got to sit down and tell them, okay, here's what's really happening, where you do a recruitment pitch, and if they accept, then you train them and then you run them. So it's spotting, assessing, training, and running.
But not a. Did it agree with you? Did you get tired of it? Did you disagree with how you?
You're dealing with people really on the most basic level you're ever going to work with them, because you're asking these people, in a lot of cases, put their life on the line. You know, if they get turned in doing this, they could either go to prison or be executed. If we get caught doing it, they P&G you, they declare you a persona non grata and kick you out of the country. But there's a lot of acceptance of this with governments. Mm-hmm. So I spent my time in Vietnam, came back. I was still in the operational end of the house. I really wanted to get into the research, and I finally got into the research. I worked there for a couple of years, and then I got an outside offer and left the agency after 10 years.
Decided you didn't want to do the 20 for a career or that. You could make more money on the outside?
I just felt that I had fallen so far behind, because here I was in the operational end and I'm taking courses at night and I'm turning down assignments because I want to go to school, and I just felt I was losing ground all the time.
How old are you about then?
I would have been in my mid-30s then. Yeah.
So in the late 60s?
Yeah.
So you go off and do what?
So I go to work for W.R. Grace. One of the guys, one of the women I worked with, her husband had just left the Naval Academy as an instructor and gone to work for W.R. Grace. And he needed somebody with my background, which was finance and ag stuff. And so I went to work with them for a couple of years. I worked in Baltimore for W.R. Grace and Company. When they moved down to Memphis, Tennessee, I decided not to go. So from there, I went to work for Merrill Lynch. I'd done some work with Merrill in connection with W.R. Grace. And so when Grace left, I thought, oh, I'll see what this is like. And I thought sales would be a good thing to get into. I really thought it was more financial analysis than it was sales, but it was sales is what it was. And so I worked with Merrill Lynch for 5 years as a broker.
Brokering?
Stocks and bonds. And I would say that, well, they gave you a 6-month training program to start off with. And 3 of those months was up in New York. So by the time you came back, you were cutting edge. All the old brokers would grab you as soon as you came back saying, what are they doing up there? You know, what's the latest thing we should be watching? And so I did brokering for 5 years. After that, I got out. About the time I was ready to leave, there was one of the guys I was working for who was on a search committee. They were looking for an investment manager for the state of Maryland. And he said, you know, we're looking for somebody with real integrity, and we think you might do it. So I interviewed for the job, and I got it right off. So it was probably in 1982 that I went to work for the state of Maryland, managing their short-term portfolio. So that portfolio was around $5 billion or so. And that was really the dream job. That was the financial analysis I've been looking for. That brought in all the training I did at Merrill Lynch, did the research, the economic stuff that I've been studying. It all came together right there. So what I thought I was going to be doing at Merrill is what I in fact was doing for the state of Maryland.
Now, go back a little ways, I would think, and talk to me about your love life. I mean, is there any women involved at any point in this time?
Yeah, let's see. I was single up until the time I was 33. And again, what I was doing a lot of time was trying to get work on a master's in economics. Again, when I was in college, I was taking all these philosophy courses and all these options, electives and whatnot. In my senior year in college, I took an economics course and I said, this is it. This is what I'm looking for. But, you know, you need math for that. So as soon as I graduated, I just started taking math courses and econ courses on my own. And I reached a point where I was getting into a calculus course and I was getting in over my head. So I went to the university math department and said, you know, I need a tutor to get me through this. So they gave me a list of names, and I just picked one off there. There was a gal's name on there, and she lived fairly close to where I was. And it was Carol Polyzoides, was a teaching assistant. She was working on her PhD in statistics there at the university. And so I stopped off at her house, and she started tutoring me. We never did finish that particular calculus course. And anyway, we got engaged, and right after that we got married. So probably 6 months after we met, we got married. I had a townhouse in Bowie, Maryland, and so Carol and Carrie moved in with me. We then eventually moved up to Baltimore as I changed jobs. And
to start working with the CIA, was it?
I think I was working with the CIA at the time, yeah, because as I recall, she being a college student, and during the Vietnam War, you know, anybody connected with the war had blood on their hands. So it took a little persuading on my part that, you know, I really was an up and up guy. But so we moved up to Baltimore, and then a couple years after that, my daughter was born, Chris. So Carrie was born in '65, and Chris was born in '74, and we lived, I guess, all our married life there in Baltimore. And after 17 years, we got a divorce. But probably, so Carrie wound up going to St. Paul's School, and then when she graduated, she went to the University of Delaware. Had no idea what she wanted to do, but she went up to New York and lived with a friend of Carol's who was running a color consulting business. And Carrie really got into that sort of business. All through high school, Carrie used to do a lot of this, cutting things out of magazines and making collages out of them. And we'd say, you know, Carrie, let's get serious. Let's do something real here. In New York, she got paid for doing that sort of thing. And so she went to work for the color consulting person.
Is this like fashionable, like dressing in colors? And
actually what it is, it's choosing the color for next season. The color for things change most every season, whether you're talking about draperies or whether you're talking about pottery, or whether you're talking about china or clothes. There's a color that comes and goes. And so she was at the cutting edge of that. After she left the color consulting thing, she went to work for, not Dooney & Burke, but Ralph Lauren. She went to work for Ralph Lauren working on leather accessories, and she really got into it. Carrie used to do design of leather goods for Ralph Lauren, which meant that she would be traveling to factories in Mexico and in China and making sure that they're doing the prototype right, and then come back and then get into the marketing of selling that sort of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like, because you're talking about your daughters and their life, and that you must be a little bit proud of them and this and that. How would you describe your parenting style, you and your wife? Was it like your parents, different?
I would say it was probably pretty similar to my parents. I thought that they had the right approach, the right affection versus discipline, making sure things go right. And I think that I developed the same style, and I think my kids appreciated that just like I appreciated it from what my parents did. But I just need to wrap up the Carrie story, because after she had,